You're listening to the A Bit From Within podcast with Felicia Marty. And this same mindset is exactly the mindset that I've had to use when it comes to learning to be less hard on myself. And honestly, that goes hand in hand with learning to accept failure. It's not something that you can fix. You can't just turn your control issues to other things and start to improve them in a more sneaky way that makes you look like you're being less hard on yourself. It's actually about learning to let go. And what that process looks like is, again, like the key word in that is it's a process. Hello there and welcome to the A Bit From Within podcast with me, Felicia Marty. I am a self-care specialist as well as a certified astrologer, and I work with clients every day to feel more comfortable owning who they truly are and to help find the little changes that can lead to big shifts in their lives. I teach people how to love and cherish themselves instead of feeling forced to be somebody that they're not. So many of us struggle to figure out who we truly are, and we're on that path, and sometimes we have so many layers that get in the way. Self-protection, trauma, things we've adopted just to fit in, things like that. And sometimes finding out how to uncover those things to get to the root of who you are, man, it makes a huge difference. And it's not a light switch moment. It's not something that just happens immediately. It's something that takes intention and thoughtfulness and time just to integrate it and to come to realizations that work for you. There are many ways to go about doing this work, and most people are already on this path. In fact, that's where so many of us align and we have so much overlap, is because most people who are tuning into this are interested in mindfulness, interested in moving the needle in how they show up and being able to choose a path that is easier for themselves or more productive or more true to who they really are. So if this is you, of course, I'm so grateful that you tuned in, and I hope that today's podcast really means something to you and gives you some inspiration and something to think about over the week ahead. And if you want to deepen this and go a little bit further, I highly recommend checking out my offers on abitfromwithin.com. You could sign up to do a reading with me where we can actually look at your natal chart and talk about what's there, what makes sense, what feels like a surprise, what feels like it just honors a truth to you or shows you something that you didn't quite have words for before. That process I've seen over and over lead to revolutionary breakthroughs for people. There's other things that I have available too that are more like self-study kind of work, where you can work with the lunar cycles to deepen your practice. All of that is available on abitfromwithin.com. And of course, if you just want to join the community that is similar to you, that enjoys the work that I'm doing on the podcast with teaching guided meditations and also taking this into the yoga classroom and actually doing online yoga classes, feel free to join our Patreon page. We've got a ton of stuff there: yoga, meditation, ad-free episodes of the podcast, wonderful connections with other humans. And of course, every month I create a unique self-care and lunar guide that is for all of the Patreon members. So if that sounds interesting to you, you can join. I think the lowest level of membership is $3 a month. And of course, that money goes to directly support the work that I'm doing as I figure out what my next step is, transitioning from being a full-time wedding photographer to something else, something that's coming. More of this work, helping other people with their self-care, and then more astrology, maybe some other kinds of photography. That's something for future Felicia to figure out, because right now, I'm not sure. I know that I'm in between both of those worlds right now. And honestly, this idea of being in the in-between is something that I've been thinking about a lot lately. Part of this is because I was hanging out with my little godson last week. He's 9 years old. He's about to be 10. And one thing I just love about having this kid around is that we have the same taste in music. We both love pop music. We know a lot of the same songs, and so we really bond over music. And somehow we got talking about the 100 Years by the Foo Fighters song, which it wasn't like a favorite song of his, but he had recognized it. And I was looking at the lyrics as I'm sitting here with him, he's about to be 10, and the first line is, "I'm 15 for a minute, caught in between 10 and 20. And I just had this moment. I didn't share this with him because it probably would have gone, right over his head the way most things do when you're not thinking about things so nostalgically. And I was thinking, he's 10 and he's caught in between 5 and 15. And what a weird time, because you do feel that when you're 10, like there's part of you that's still like just a little kid, like a 5-year-old, and then part of yourself that wants to be a grown up, like how you see a 15-year-old. Not that 15 is grown up, and it's a similar but different, in between from being 15 and being in between 10 and 20, where there's a part of you that is still learning things and growing up and figuring out what it means to grow up. And then 20, where you're supposed to have all your stuff together and you make that official launch into adulthood. And you're caught in between that. And I just started thinking about how many times in our life that we're caught in the in-between, because it doesn't really stop there. And I think I used to think that. I used to think, okay, well, I'm 10, I'm in the in-between, but it'll end. And I'm 15, I'm in the in-between, but that'll end. And then, you're 20, and then it's like you're caught in the in-between of 10 and 30. When you're 30, you're caught between, 20 and 40. And when you're 50, you're caught between 20 and 80. It's just, it never stops. It's like there's always this part of yourself that feels like it's that you're stepping through a doorway. And I guess like this revelation I just had is I'm like, that never ends. Like you never arrive somewhere, because every time you've arrived at a place that you thought you were working toward, like you're back at the in-between, like you're back in the middle of a new doorway. And so it never stops. It's cyclical. And it's just been this thing that I've been thinking about a lot, especially as, I like being here. It's September officially. I'm recording this on Labor Day on Monday, September 6th. Is that right? And I'm like, oh my God, it's September. In February and in March, I was recording podcasts talking about like what this year would be like. And I had this huge idea of what was in front of me. And I was really trepidatious and fearful about what this transition would look like. And I kept thinking like, well, once I get towards September, October, I'm going to have so much more information, so much more knowledge. I'm going to have a really solid game plan. And here it is. I am here. I am in that doorway. And I don't feel, I have a game plan. I have done work, but I don't feel like I've arrived in the way that I thought that I had needed to be arriving by the time I was here in the timeline. Does that make sense? And, this isn't the first time I've necessarily thought about this concept, because so much of what I have struggled with in my life is the expectations that I have had of myself by certain timeline markers. And part of the work that I've had to do with that is letting go of what I thought should be happening and really try to embrace more of what is actually happening right now. It's hard to do. It takes a lot of softness. It takes a lot of flexibility. It takes a lot of letting go of expectations. Also takes some grieving, grieving where you thought you would have been, or the doors that have closed that you've walked through or walked past that didn't open for you. That's definitely something that you're allowed to be sad by. So in some ways, this little message kind of connects to the heart of today's episode. Today I wanted to share about how to not be so hard on yourself, and a little bit from within that I've learned about being too hard on myself and how to let go of those things, and how it's something that is not a light switch moment. I go to that light switch analogy a lot because of that black and white thinking, and that idea that like once we realize something that the aftermath or the result should be immediate, and it's often not that way. And so it's not a light switch moment when you are trying to learn to change your baseline. If your baseline is to be hard on yourself, you don't just stop doing that. If your baseline is to be anxious, you don't just stop doing that. It takes time to shift and create a new pathway for yourself. So that's a lot of what I want to share about today. But before we get there, let's talk a little bit about what is happening astrologically during our Astro Check-in. So what is going on? Well, we are leading up to this month's full moon. This is going to be a Pisces full moon, and every full moon brings up a chance for us to look at opposite signs. So Pisces, this water sign that is more associated with dreams and compassion and magic and slow movement and this ethereal quality, this spiritual space, versus Virgo, its sister sign, which is a very airy earth sign. So it's technically an earth sign, but it is ruled by Mercury. It is fast moving, it is analytical, and very practical. And so where do these signs have something in common? Now, you can obviously tell from those two different descriptions that these two signs are very, very different, but they both are very geared towards helping others and being of service. Virgo does that in a very analytical, practical way. It says what's not working and what can be done to make things better. Pisces says what doesn't feel right and how can we make it feel better by understanding the bigger picture or being more spiritual about it, or by talking about how we feel about it, or by dreaming up other ways that it could be, or escaping it in a fantasy. So this polarity is something hard to balance, and it's going to be a tricky one as we move into this weekend. The way that I like to approach full moons is by looking at both signs and figuring out which side am I leaning more towards right now. Sometimes it's a very clear-cut, obvious answer. It's like, nope, this is more associated with who I am. Other times it'll be more circumstantial, where maybe you're not always a dreamer about something or really feel the need to escape things, but right now, with what you have going on in your life, that's closer to what you've been doing as a default. And so there might be more of a need to look at the opposite and draw on the opposite. That's what I like to think about full moons, is that it's a light shining down saying, here's the missing puzzle piece. This is what you haven't been thinking about. Think about this too. Find balance here, or at least explore it so that you are more sure of the direction that you choose. There are always things that we can learn from looking at the other side. And that is a place that I come back to over and over again. I think it is so important, even if you don't necessarily agree with something, to understand the why of another person's side or another side of the coin of an issue. When you do this, you make better, thoughtful decisions, and you have expanded your own capacity of your heart or your mind. You're always going to be better off for doing that. And I think that's part of the reason why we go through these moon cycles, where sometimes it's like everything is aligned and you're on the same page. And then sometimes, in fact, once every single lunar cycle, you have to explore the other side of the coin. So this month during the full moon, just to kind of wrap up the full moon part, you are exploring Virgo and Pisces. Practicality, which is with Virgo, attention to detail, having everything figured out, needing answers on things, seeing things a little bit more black and white. And then Pisces, that sees everything in color, that is super sentimental, that is very much idealistic, very spiritual, and also understands that there's not always a clear-cut answer. Sometimes things are just a little bit more complicated than they seem, and that there's a place for that too. Now, with all of that being said, the other thing that is happening on the same day as the full moon, so on Saturday, September 10th, Mercury goes officially retrograde. And if you haven't had a chance to listen to my last podcast, which I talk a lot about the retrograde and a lot about slowing down, I highly recommend tuning into that previous episode. What I will say for right now is it's very important to remember and to not buy into the narrative that Mercury retrograde is a bad thing or a curse or something that we just need to fast forward through. Because if that is your approach, then you are missing the beauty of the journey. Mercury retrograde happens 3 to 4 times a year, so it's not a great practice to get into to just want to rush through it. Like there's something here we need to pay attention to. That said, it also can be very aggravating and frustrating. In fact, today I've always feel Mercury retrogrades pretty strong during the pre-shadow period where you can start to feel like the changing of the tides. And I already had so many issues with my computer today. It was like the hard drive got full and then files were duplicating and things weren't downloading correctly, and it was frustrating. And I just had to remember to take a nice deep breath, let it all back out, find that exhale, and just remember all of this is temporary. Even the frustrations, even the things going slower, even having to backtrack to make space. It's worth going slow, making sure that you don't make any mistakes, and to not allow yourself to get frustrated by it. If you are getting too frustrated, I think this is good advice anytime, but especially during a Mercury retrograde. If you are getting too frustrated that you are making fast or hasty decisions, or just really starting to get focused on the result and not being sure of yourself through the process, it's better to pause and stop and come back to it. Whether you need to walk away for an hour or 5 minutes or one nice deep breath and a shoulder roll, stop what you're doing when you start to get too frustrated, breathe, and come back to it. That is going to be my best advice for as we head into this full moon. And honestly, there's a feeling of just a major slowdown. In fact, if you're going to take some time for yourself this full moon, I recommend slowing down, journaling, taking a luxurious bath, maybe even just cooking yourself a really cozy meal at home, actually setting the table, getting yourself some flowers, and letting it be a really nourishing meal. In general, I feel like when you do a ritual, that it should be something that you're able to do with your full 100% capacity. And so if you're only trying to make it magical and mystical, but your mind's not really there, it doesn't really matter. So whatever you do, show up fully, even if it's 5 minutes to stand under the full moon outside and just let the lights wash down on you. I will say Pisces full moons sometimes bring tears too. So if you find yourself feeling a little emotional, crying some tears, feeling really sensitive or sentimental, that's okay. In fact, if you ever feel like that and you find yourself in a place where you're crying a lot, just remember, crying is the highest form of yoga. It truly is. One of my favorite yoga teachers always would tell me that, and her teacher taught that to her. So it's something I think about a lot. But it'll be good. And just remember, go slow, enjoy it. It'll be great. All right, with that said, let's take a quick break and let's come back and talk about being so hard on ourselves and how to stop doing that. Okay, so I can't remember if I've told this story on the podcast before, but I remember when I was in 6th grade, it had already started then. The being way too hard on myself, holding myself to unreasonable expectations. Actually, I think it started even earlier than that. I remember when I used to live in the very first house we lived in. I remember I got my first B, and I just lost it. I don't even remember how old I was, maybe 8 or 9, or maybe I was closer to 10, 9 or 10, caught in the in-between, right? And I got my first B, and I lost it. I lost my shit. I was crying like crazy, and I remember just saying B is for bad, B is for bad, and I was inconsolable. And then, of course, you learn to live with that, and you move forward, and I had a really hard time with math. And I knew I had a hard time with math. I was not getting it. I I felt like I needed so much more help, and I didn't really know how to advocate for myself. And I felt like I couldn't even quite put into words what about it I didn't understand. I just knew that like people around me were getting it, and like the curriculum just kept moving forward, and I felt like I was really falling behind. And so I went through this period where like I'd have to turn in like a math test, and I would just like write at the top of it like, I'm so stupid, I'm such an idiot. And I think, I mean, gosh, it's so silly now and like pretty dramatic, but what I was trying to do, if I look back on it, is like I was trying to like preface the grading of the test. So it's like, if you grade this badly and I suck, like I'm letting you know that I already know that I suck. So you can't hurt me by like showing me that I failed, because I already know that I don't get it. And you'd think that that would have led to something a little bit more helpful or whatnot. I mean, I know that the teacher assistant did talk to my parents, and I remember my mom asking me about it. And I don't have a lot of memories of like how that was resolved or whatever. I know I didn't write that on my tests anymore. But I can look back to that and be like, obviously I was already feeling like way too hard on myself then. And that's when I really started to notice a narrative coming from teachers and outside of myself where people would be like, gosh, you're so hard on yourself. You're so hard on yourself. I heard that so many times. And there were times in my life that when I would hear that, it would make me really angry and frustrated, because I already felt like I knew that, and I didn't feel like I was being hard on myself. I didn't feel like I was holding myself to some unreasonable standard. I didn't even have a concept of what that looked like to not operate or think that way. You know, obviously now I can look back and be like, wow, I had such distorted thinking. I legitimately thought that every single person was having flight or fight responses to things going well or things not going well. I didn't even know that there was a way that you could be more reasonable and not live your life being so completely hard on yourself. And now, like, life has taught me a lot about this, because I think what happens is, whether, you know, this subject, like being hard on yourself or being perfectionistic, when you are that way, life is going to show you a lot of opportunities that can help you learn your way through that. Like, I have been given so many situations that have just like little failures, big failures, hard things, small things that have put me to the test, where I had to figure out like, okay, how am I going to deal with this on the inside? And if I chose that unreasonable standard, like I wouldn't be here right now. I would literally be on the floor somewhere crying, because I couldn't have gotten over how things had turned out that I couldn't control. And I think this is true for whatever place in your life that you're out of balance. Like, if you're out of balance in an area, like, life is going to show you how to figure that out, and you get to decide how you're going to respond to those opportunities. For me, this has honestly been such a long, ongoing story. And the growth that I have had around it, I'm really starting to notice my breakthroughs now. But for many, many years of my life, I didn't feel like I was making that much progress, because there were so many little walls that I had to put down, and little like battles that I had to face and learn to let go of, and really incorporate those lessons onto like a deeper level of my gut. And in a way, I feel really lucky, because it has truly been my work starting my own business, being a wedding photographer, and creating this big business where I work with a lot of clients, that has taught me so much about what standards are just unreasonable. And if I look back at how I conducted my business 6 years ago, I was definitely operating at standards that I just thought should be baseline. I was checking my email like 24 hours a day. I was responding to people immediately. Everything felt urgent to me. And that wasn't a good business practice, because basically what I was doing is I was saying that I felt threatened by every single customer. Any one of these people is somebody who can take me down by telling me that I'm not good enough. Either my art's not going to be good enough, or how I planned the timeline wasn't good enough, or this photo was forgotten and I should have known. Like, I put so much pressure on myself to be everything for these clients, way more than just showing up and capturing whatever happened. It was so much more than that. And am I proud of some of those things? Yeah, absolutely. But at the end of the day, there would be, it wasn't every wedding, but there would be a handful of weddings in every single season where things that I couldn't control made a difference. And this is something that I still struggle with. Last month, I had a wedding where it rained. And it rained pretty bad. It actually moved the ceremony indoors. And when the bride and I were talking leading up to the wedding, I let her know, I'm like, hey, I always, one of my business tenets, whether it's this business A Bit From Within or whether it's my photography business, I believe in being 1,000% transparent with people. So when we were talking about the rain on her wedding day, we talked about the worst case scenario. Okay, worst case scenario, we're going to have to move, some stuff inside. And then we just try to get outside as much as possible. I told her worst case scenario. But I was pretty sure, I was the other thing I always tell brides when it comes to weather is I'm don't check the forecast leading up to a wedding, because here in Colorado, it changes way too much to know. But of course, in the background, I'm checking the weather every day because I want to have a game plan of what to expect. Well, the night before the wedding, I checked the forecast and it looked like clouds, but no rain. I'm like, great. I checked the forecast as I'm driving to the wedding. I mean, not literally in the car driving, but as I'm getting into the car. And it says some showers between 2 and 3. I'm like, okay, this is not great, but it'll be fine. It looked like light showers. And then it's we're arriving and it's kind of sprinkling, and I'm looking at the forecast. I'm like, it's starting to come in a lot more. The sky looked really dark. I'm trying to be positive. I'm like, nope, it's going to be fine. We can't overthink this. It's going to be fine. So it sprinkles on their first look, but we still get as many pictures as possible in. And then as we're on our way to the ceremony, it just starts dumping rain. So much rain. I couldn't believe how hard it was raining. And the thing is, with summer weddings and all of my experience, there's been very few times where it's rained so much that it didn't just blow over or it didn't pass through. In Colorado, a lot of times that's the case. So sometimes we'll push a wedding back a little bit, or if it's not raining too hard, you can go outside under umbrellas. But even that one for this wedding, it didn't really honestly feel like an option. It was raining so hard. It was where it's bouncing off the road and coming back up on you. So even if you have an umbrella, you're still getting soaked and drenched. And it was cold. And I mean, it was definitely not what anybody wanted. And I felt horrible because I felt like I had been so encouraging that wouldn't happen. Even as we were up there, driving up there, I just kept thinking nope. It's not going to be raining that bad. You're totally going to be able to have an outdoor ceremony. It's going to be okay. And honestly, this whole thing about the ceremony being indoors and should we go outside or should we not? I felt like I carried so much guilt with me. Guilt about the rain. Guilt that there wasn't a better plan that was the ultimate ideal for her. And I now... this just happened last month. So now that I'm more experienced, I'm able to talk myself through it. Hey, Felicia, of course you want your weddings and your clients' weddings to be everything that they dreamed of. So does it suck that didn't happen? Yeah, it does. Did you make the best of it though? Yes, we absolutely did. We got all of the rest of the pictures taken outside, including all of the post-ceremony family pictures and their bride and groom pictures. And so we were really able to make the most of that. And even the indoor ceremony photos, while not what was the original vision, still ended up being gorgeous. And the dress didn't have to get ruined. The guests were comfortable. Through the window, it looked like this cozy little Pacific Northwest. It was like all of the evergreens around were beautiful. There was all this fog and this rain. Like, it was gorgeous. So again, and that's ultimately what matters most. But I needed almost 10 years in wedding photography to help me figure out the difference between what I can control and what I can't control. And it is crazy the number of things that I felt like it was my job to control, like the weather. That's crazy that there's a logical part of my brain that thinks that I should be able to control the weather. And honestly, it has taken 10 years of wedding photography and running my own business to really start to help me figure out like what's actually in my control and what's not, and how do I be more reasonable with myself and not hold myself to expectations that I just straight up can't control. I can't control the weather. I also am finally starting to realize like I can't control how other people react to things. And for a lot of my life, I thought that I did. I thought I could. I thought if I could, approach a situation this way, then it would make other people happy. If I talked about these things, then those people could be like this. And if I explained it in this way, people would make better choices. And I am finally to the place, 35 years old, where I'm starting to realize and cut through some of that bullshit and realize I can't control other people. In fact, I have a hard enough time figuring out how to control myself all the time and to really own that. How do I own making my own decisions and deciding for myself how I want to operate and move through the world? And that takes me back, like being around kids is such an eye-opener, and my time last week hanging out with my godson, it showed me so many things. But he had decided to bring his fidget spinner on an errand with us. And when we were checking out of the store and walking out, he thought he had lost it. And, we went through the different scenarios like, okay, well, we can either go retrace our footsteps and try to find it. We can hope another kid found it and just hope it finds its way into the right hands of somebody else. Or, maybe there's a chance that it's just lost in all of our stuff and that we'll find it. So luckily, that's what happened. We found it there, like in the car under a bunch of things. And so he was like, oh, phew, like, I'm so glad I found it, because otherwise, like, I would have just been miserable the rest of the day. Like, that would have ruined my whole day. And I had to kind of challenge his thinking on that. I'm like, really? Like, just losing that one thing, like, this would ruin your whole day? There's nothing else good that could happen today? And, while I was challenging his thinking, I realized that there were times in my life that I used to feel that same way about things. And I think a lot of us do. We don't even realize that we're consciously throwing in the towel all of the time, catastrophizing or letting little things turn into big things when they don't need to be. And the only person who can choose to look at something differently is yourself. Like, nobody else. Like, I couldn't go to my godson and say, nope, this won't ruin your day. It's fine. That wouldn't do anything. It has to be his decision to not let it ruin his whole day. Just as, if my computer goes slow or the files don't transfer or have a frustrating computer thing, I have to not let that ruin my whole day. And this same mindset is exactly the mindset that I've had to use when it comes to learning to be less hard on myself. And honestly, that goes hand in hand with learning to accept failure. And I think it's good to think of little examples and then let that build on or spill out to bigger examples. So for me, a really tiny thing that happened that I really noticed I started to beat myself up for, there was like a calendar error that happened with my business. Nothing bad happened. Like, everybody was still on board with the event and whatnot. But I had a second photographer who was scheduled for a gig coming up later this month that never got the calendar invite. And she had specifically asked me for it, and we do it as part of our protocol anyway. But when I realized that she wasn't on it, I immediately was like, oh my God, where did I drop the ball on this? I swore I remembered doing it. I expect myself to be, so good about all of the logistics, making sure everybody's on the same page. And I really started to beat myself up. And then I had to realize, I'm like, okay. So I send the calendar invite now and I address it. I sent her a quick email saying like, hey, I'm really sorry. I think there was an error on this on my behalf. And if you have any questions, please let me know. Move on. But if that would have happened 3 or 4 years ago when I was just starting to work with a team, I would have been distraught. Like I would have probably cried. I would have felt like I'm the worst business owner in the world. And I would have been really irrational about the whole thing. And I would have let it probably destroy me. I probably would have checked every single calendar invite. I would have gone through every nose full. I would have spent hours just like trying to control the situation. And it's funny that that part comes up right now because control issues in general are also interweaved through all of this stuff. If you are too hard on yourself, you're also probably afraid of failing. And when you're afraid of failing, you also try to control everything because then you feel like it's a big cycle. If you're in control, then you can't fail, and then you're perfect, and then you're good enough, and then, then you're awesome and nothing can go wrong. But we all know that that's not how life is. And you cannot control everything, and you can't be perfect either. And I suppose that I'm at this place in my life where I'm finally ready to be softer around perfection and starting to really, really let go of the need to control and the need to be perfect and all of those things. I'm starting to finally realize that yes, while I have parts of my personality, and I go back to astrology, I'm a Virgo rising. I do have a tendency to kind of be able to look at the big picture and see where the details aren't working out right and make it better. There's a natural part of my personality that wants to fix things and perfect them and improve them as I serve others. But that is different than the trauma response that is everything else I'm talking about. This fear of not being good enough. So when I start to let go, when I start to say, what does life look like if I am not afraid of being worthy enough? If I just accept that I am who I am, and I really do not operate from a place of trying to prove myself, then what happens? It's like this whole new baseline shifts, and it's unfamiliar and it's new and it's exciting and it's a little scary, but it also feels like coming home to yourself. And I'm very, very interested and intrigued by this right now. And I honestly feel like this is the journey of learning to be less hard on yourself. It's not something that you can fix. You can't just turn your control issues to other things and start to improve them in a more sneaky way that makes you look like you're being less hard on yourself. It's actually about learning to let go. And what that process looks like is, again, like the key word in that is it's a process. It's a process of knowing what your intentions are and being willing to show up for yourself every single day and examine the thought process that goes behind your decisions. Are you doing it to prove something? Are you doing it to control something? Are your expectations reasonable? And if they're not, what's going into making you think that that should be your first choice for those expectations? Because a lot of the time we don't actually give ourselves wiggle room. We just think whatever we come in expecting is what should happen. And we don't challenge ourselves very often. But this takes work. This takes being willing to be honest and honestly being willing to challenge yourself. It's not easy, but it is worth it. And I think when you start to put that in place, life will start to, it's going to happen at the speed it happens. There are times in my life as I've been doing this work where it felt like the needle moved really slowly. Right now in my life, I feel like the needle is moving really fast. But that might just be because of all of the years of groundwork that I've done to get the ball rolling. Kind of like an actual snowball. It starts out really small and you don't feel like you're getting anywhere with it. And then all of a sudden, once it hits a certain point where it's a lot bigger, then the momentum that it's able to collect or the amount of snow it's able to put on itself makes a bigger impact. Which is why you cannot give up. You can't give up in the beginning. You can't get to a place in your life where you just say, nope, this is just how I am, and there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. We are all capable of growth, and we are all capable of incredible things when we are the one to decide that we want to be different, when we want to create a new baseline, or we want to see improvement in an area of our life, or that we are no longer satisfied with a certain way that we've been operating for however long. So if this is you, if you resonate with this on any level, that's the whole point why I call this a bit from within, is maybe it's not exactly like perfectionism in the way that I've described, but it does connect with that one little tiny place in your life that looks different, but feels the same. I hope that you remember the big picture. I hope that you give yourself space to let go of the stuff that is more extra, that's auxiliary, that has come from fear or from programming and is not true to your authentic self. And maybe it can be a curiosity about what's underneath it. And here's my last little shameless plug before we do our card drawing and close today's episode. I really think that looking at your astrological chart as a whole can be so illuminating when it comes to this conversation. Whether it's seeing how anxiety manifests in your chart, or seeing where you shine, seeing how your mind works in contrast or in alignment with your ego or with your rising sign. Like, there's so much there in your natal chart. And some of the work I think that starts to happen when you look at those deeper levels is you can start to see the places where you've created a way of being out of fear, and what it could look like on the other side. Like, for example, my moon is in Taurus, and as a Taurus moon, I can be very stubborn about things. I can be very black and white about things. Earth signs have a little bit of a tendency to do that. But, I would look at a lot of the characteristics of a Taurus moon, and I would say, I just don't know that I feel like that. I don't feel like I'm slow. I don't feel like there's a steadiness to me. I feel like I want to operate fast, and I want to think about things. I want to go, go, go. And I think there's space for both. There is part of me that is very fast-paced, fast-natured, a generator, a ball of energy. And there's this part of me that I have denied for so long that needs spaciousness, that needs a slow, steady pace. And it's funny because the places in my life that have felt slow are places that I've felt so ashamed for being slow, because again, I had this idea that things should go in a certain way on a certain timeline and go fast. And when they weren't that way, I felt like it was a failure. So it makes sense why I would see the description of Taurus moon and reject that part of myself. So, but I never would have started to uncover that if I didn't have a curiosity about what could be there on the other side. And honestly, it wasn't as though I was looking at the astrology to tell me who to be. It was more that I was like, is that there? And once I opened that door, I had so many internal revelations about myself and about what was really going on deep down. And so I think that if you want to have breakthroughs like that, if you're curious about what is there for you, sitting down and looking at your natal chart could be a wonderful thing. And I always say this, like, you can do the self-study. That is how I've got really into astrology. Like, there is nothing wrong with looking up YouTube videos and searching your chart by yourself and just taking it little by little. But if you want to have the conversation with somebody who's very familiar with astrology, who can kind of take your natal chart and show it to you and like present it to you like a map and tell you all about what to expect and to help it make sense, to be that translator or that guide for the map, please let me know. I would love to do a reading for you. You can purchase a reading, either a small one or an hour-long one, right from my website. It would be such an honor to look at your natal chart with you. All right, let's close today's episode with a card drawing. I've got the Love and Relationships Affirmators deck. Just take a nice deep breath here, shuffle these cards, and see what the universe wants to contribute to our conversation today. I am like in shock right now. This card, it says maturity. And even though I didn't talk a lot about that word in today's episode, it's a word that has been coming up in my life a lot. Like, what does it look like to be mature? So this card says maturity. I make peace with the tough relationships of my past. I probably would have skipped the pain they came with, but I am grateful for the lessons they brought me. Because of those tough relationships, I can look back at the mosaic of my life and see value even in the most broken pieces. There's a little asterisk here where it kind of like translate it into, I can look back at the mosaic of my life, i.e. internet stalk my exes, and see the value in the most broken pieces, i.e. I really dodged a bullet. Of course, this deck does have that more of like the relationship feel to it, but the concept of this card, this maturity of making peace with your life, it fits in perfectly with the conversation we're having, because it's a natural part of self-growth is once you start doing these things and making these decisions and improving your life and living more mindfully and working through the hard things, making peace with the tough stuff, you become naturally more mature, and you can make better decisions, and you can be a more steady person, not just for others, but for yourself, which is so important. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you know that when I sit here and record that I just picture all of your faces, and even if I've never met you in person, I try to just hold space in my heart for your energy and how this might land for you. It really does mean a lot to me. And if you're not already subscribed to the A Bit From Within podcast, either through, a podcast platform, I would love it if you do that so you can get new episodes each and every week. Or better yet, if it works for you, consider supporting my work by joining our Patreon page, patreon.com/abitfromwithin. I know that a lot of you listening to this are Patreon members too, and I want to say a huge thank you to you. You guys have been integral to my business the past 2 years and such an important part of my life. So however you can interact, connect, please know it means the world to me, bottom line. That is it for today, and until next time.